All right, welcome to Words of the Wise. Today's guest is Chief Miller from Irving, Texas, or Irving PD in Texas, and he has over 33 years experience in law enforcement, and I am so excited to have him on the show talk about some personal and organizational wellness. So welcome to Words of the Wise, Chief Miller. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about this, but this is our first time actually officially meeting, but I know of your agency through the wellness space. I've
Yeah.
heard good things, and so I'm really excited to talk about what you guys are doing at Irving PD. But before we do that, I would really love to give our listeners a little background on you. How did you get started in law enforcement? Why did you get started in law enforcement? And what that 33 years has looked like up until this
It's
point.
like long. I
Right.
started when I was 22 years old. So I started in 1992, had a heart to serve. I knew I wanted to be a cop. And so I applied for a place in Texas here in the Dallas Metroplex. Carrollton, Texas is a suburb of uh, at the time, it was about 130,000 people. The police department was about 150 folks at the time, and just wanted to be I wanted to be a cop. I wanted to chase bad guys, and so was able to do that. And so started as a reserve police officer. Actually, my last year of college at UTA, University of Texas at Arlington, and was fortunate enough to be hired there and served there from reserve. And worked my way up all the way to the rank of chief. Before I left, I was the chief of that organization for the almost nearly 5 years before I left. And then I had the opportunity. I knew Irving was a much larger police department, and I know they were doing great, amazing things, and I wanted to be a part of that. And so, about 3 years, in May it'll be 3 years. I came over to, or was fortunate to be hired as a chief in Irving. So here I am. So never wanted to be a chief. I was one of those cops that every time I got frustrated or upset about something, I just figured the best way for me to make a change was to promote. And so again, I didn't like how recruits were being trained. I became an FTO, and then I got tired of sergeants who I didn't think knew what they were talking about. Uh, Working for them, so I became a sergeant, and then lieutenant commander all the way up. Same thing. So here I am. I'm 33 years later, sitting in the chief's chair.
I love that mentality. And this is the first time I've ever heard that, where you're like,
Yeah,
I didn't like how things were done. So
yeah,
instead of complaining about it,
right.
I decided that I was going to promote and try to make a change and do better. I think that
Yeah,
that's really, really cool.
yeah,
That's a cool
right.
perspective.
Yeah, I didn't want to be. I was a sergeant for 12 years. I used to call myself SFL, Sergeant for Life. But I, I don't like mediocrity. And so I thought I'll just make a change. And the best way to do it is to promote. So
Yeah,
here
you're
I am.
like, we need the A game all the
Yeah,
time. Yeah.
yeah. Uh,
I also
uh,
really love anyone who I meet who has a story of like I started as a volunteer. I
mhm.
really love that because I think it shows the love and the passion that you have for what you're doing. And it's not to say that someone who didn't volunteer doesn't have that same love and passion, but I always love to meet individuals who have that because I started too as a volunteer where I tell people all the time, I'm like, I didn't have to be there. I wasn't being
Right.
paid to be there. It was really a labor of love and because I wanted to be there. And so to meet someone like yourself who also had that of like, I just wanted to be a cop. Like I just wanted to
Yeah.
be here. I loved it. And then now here you are 33 years later,
Yeah.
still in
Right.
the career as chief of police. So I think that
Right.
that's a really cool story.
Yeah. Cool. I tell people though I'm not a cop anymore. When you get this high, you're too busy working on budget and all the other stuff. You don't get to do the stuff that you really want to do.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we hear that all the time. They're like, I'm not really out there anymore, but you're serving your people. So I wanted to talk a little bit, I think that there are a lot of states out there that, or maybe a handful of states out there that I think are known for wellness. You have California, Colorado, Washington. Texas isn't typically a state that you think of when you think of wellness. And there's a handful of agencies that I know of personally that are doing, really progressive things like yourself. I've heard good things about Dallas, Austin. Why do you think that Texas maybe isn't known for that, or um, maybe hasn't adopted those things as a whole. What is your opinion on that?
My opinion, and this is my opinion, not based on any fact.
Right.
I think it's probably emblematic of most of the profession in the United States, but I think in Texas we have a certain bravado. We're Texans. We have a pledge to our own flag. Our flag hangs as high as the United States flag. I just think that it's a very male dominated, or was when I started, a very male dominated, quasi military organization where, I was told, you always thought someone was going to try to threaten to harm you, and you were just inculcated with this idea that this ultra warrior mindset, and based on and then I think sprinkle a little bit of our culture in there. We just don't talk about it. And when I started, like I mentioned earlier, 22 years old, dealing with very difficult things, seeing very very difficult things, you were told to deal with it.
Mhm.
And I just think that probably that bravado or those ideas turned into a culture. And I think as I travel the state of Texas, we're new to this. I think we've made a lot of ground in the last decade or so, but I just think it's just kind of in our culture still. And that's why the work still is necessary, and the message that we're sending still needs to be broadcasted loud and clear, because it hadn't reached everyone yet. So I just think,
Yeah.
like I said earlier, I just think it might be us, how we are, how we're wired, or how we were wired.
Yeah, and I think that it takes, I mean, you see this internally, organizationally too, but it takes kind of those early adopters
Mhm.
to set the tone and to start the momentum. So it sounds like there's, a handful of agencies in the state of Texas that are those early adopters and are
Right.
starting that momentum. And,
Mhm.
we talked about this earlier, but you said there was this mentality when you started that, you weren't a real cop if you needed resources, or
Mhm.
you weren't a part of the guys, or,
Mhm.
the team. And there was kind of that social pressure of like, just like you said, just deal with it, like shove it down, rub dirt on it, keep moving.
Mhm.
With that experience that you had, in earlier in your career where there weren't resources and there was this mentality of, you're not a cop if, or you're weak if you need resources, how did you deal? How did you personally, was there anything that you did for your own wellness that kind of got you through that 33 years?
I'm blessed. I'm blessed to have um, benefited personally from a strong family and faith, um, and the camaraderie of my team. I'm a team guy. My whole career has been either in SWAT or tactical in some form and fashion. So I was always fortunate to have surrounded myself around that. But there was a lot of, still coping is internal, right? I mean, I had to, deal with things internally. I don't think I over medicated. I think I had behaviors that I leaned on for either drinking or dipping Copenhagen, or staying out all night, maybe some risky behavior in my younger years. Um, but I think I was lucky in that, because I did have people around me who were all kind of doing it together and trying to support one another. But yeah, if you admitted it that you were struggling or you weren't fine, ask, "Are you okay? Are you fine?" You were seen as less than,
Mhm.
and so that's what I think is the most harmful part of this. People don't realize, and that's why we have to remove the stigma. Um, because the way I grew up in this profession, you didn't talk about it, and if you did, you were less than. You weren't a team guy, or you know, how can you do what we do if you can't handle what we've seen? And that was very much how we thought. And so, Lord knows how many of us survived, and I know unfortunately many of us didn't survive.
Um, And I think too, like we hear so many stories that are similar, and I appreciate you sharing that of like, like I wasn't perfect and there were certain things that I did to kind of to cope and to deal. And we hear a lot of stories from individuals in the space that talk about that, the like, the avoiding or the escaping or the numbing, the drinking, whatever that is.
Mhm.
But I also have heard a lot of individuals in leadership say something similar, and I kind of want to dive into this a little bit and get your opinion on the importance of this. But I've heard a lot of people say, I had a community outside of law enforcement that helped me or grounded me. And so you said that you were grounded in your faith and your family. How
Mhm.
important do you think that was or that is for individuals in this profession to have that outside of the job?
Thank you for picking up on that. I realized that until you said that. It's huge. I had a lieutenant, he was a lieutenant, I was a cop, and he told me from the very beginning, and I didn't know what he meant. In fact, I kind of took offense to it when he said it, but he said, um, all your friends shouldn't be cops.
Mhm.
Hang on to the people who are in your life. Today, when I talk at academy graduations, I only speak to the graduating recruits. I speak to the families, and I admonish them to ensure that their loved one holds on to those values that they came up and were brought up with. When I hire new police officers here and I sit down with them pre-hire, we hire a lot of lateral police officers. And one of my main concerns when I hire a lateral police officer is not with everybody comes to us with a certain set of skills or they wouldn't be in my office at that juncture in their career. So I want to know, do you have people here or there are loved ones or friends here that you can connect with if you need help or support? To answer your question, having that outside network of or community of family and friends who can support you is to me huge. Um, we all, like I mentioned, I was a team guy. You can also have group thinking teams, and you can also take on a certain personality. Teams and shifts and units and divisions can take on certain personalities, but you really need those things that you brought to this profession when you got here. That's where your values are rooted. And so, not everybody has strong family trees when they come to us, but I want to make sure they have strong friendship. It could be old army buddies. It could be um, friends who they grew up with. But I do think having a community to support you is extremely huge in getting through this journey of ours.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing that because I do think that that's, like we said, something that I hear a lot. It's like having a network outside or interests outside of the job that help to ground you.
Mhm.
And I had someone recently say, like, this job will change you.
Mhm.
But if you have that community, they can keep you in check a little
Yeah,
bit of
right,
like, hey man, like you've changed a little bit, or
right.
hey, like I'm starting to see it. So it's kind of that accountability of another network that's like, hey, like I'm noticing these changes and kind of keep you in check.
Right. And we become so hyper vigilant in after the first year, we turn into these robots who won't to the back of the door and thinks everyone's got a plan to kill us. And we all, we're just so hyper vigilant. And it's our loved ones who say, my mom used to say, boy, ain't nobody trying to jump on you here at Whataburger or wherever we were. Just chill. And I just think, not to throw out officer safety, but we're still humans in society, and I genuinely think and I know that most people are good, and I just think you have your family and your loved ones in your community who remind you of you're still you're still who you were. Keep your values, know where your north star is, know what your why is. I tell people all the time, you have to know this speaks to also keeping yourself centered. You have to know what your North Star is. You
Mhm.
have to understand it. I tell people you cannot come to this profession. I wish someone would have told me this. You cannot come to this profession thinking, I think I can do that. I just want to try it on. You have to come to this profession with truly a servant's heart and truly wanting to serve. That service may be, running in when people are running out. It's okay. That's cool. But just know what you're coming to this profession for.
And I love that you brought up the why. And I think that this is really important in two different contexts. One, why you're doing this job. like you
Hmm.
said, that North
Hmm.
Star, why are you here? And then referring back to that in the hard times, because that is something that keeps you going, because
Right.
you realize that there's a deeper reason why you're doing the things that you're doing, because they are extraordinarily difficult.
Hmm.
Um, but also in the context of wellness. Like, why is it important for you to be physically and mentally fit or physically and mentally well, however you want to phrase it? And so I would love to know either one of those from you.
Yeah.
What is your why?
I'm going to tell you, and thank you for asking me that. I'm going to tell you that my why has always been, I was always called to this profession. I felt that I wanted to put myself in harm's way. You know, there's a verse in the Bible, Isaiah 6:8, it talks about, who shall I send? Send me. I always had that gut feeling that, not that it was fatalistic, but I knew that if there were trouble and they were innocent or people who were vulnerable, I felt like I was called to protect, to put myself first before them. Um, this idea has really formalized into, I work with an organization called The Curve, and I think that we have beautifully, eloquently put this whole message together. And frankly, my why then in 1992, my why then in 2000 when I promoted to sergeant, my why all the way up the chain has been one single factor, and quite simply is to protect the vulnerable from harm. Our purpose in how we do that is to protect life and to protect the peace, and then to protect property, because those ideals are framed in our Constitution. But the why in that is to protect those who need protecting, is to protect those who have found themselves in need of service, and so to protect the vulnerable from harm is, I say that in my organization, and people's ears bleed. I continue to talk about that message. We've got it on walls. I've got it on challenge coins, because that message, that North Star, gets us through everything, through the hard times, through we've had some tragic things happen in town, or unfortunate things happen. And you have to say, or, I'm challenged about, policy, or I'm challenged about some of my officers' actions, but the North Star is that we're protecting those who are harmed, and we're doing it in a way that we're treating everyone we come into contact with professionalism, dignity, and respect.
Mhm.
Then I'm okay with what we're doing. And so, personally and professionally, our why, frankly, I wish I could talk, and I think I can talk for every American police officer, is to protect the vulnerable from harm. This, I know there's been this debate over warrior versus guardian. I think we're guardians. I think that when we need to be warriors, we are. Um, but I think what we're here for is to protect, and that's my why. That's my why. It's been my why. Will remain my why in this job.
I love that. And I really appreciate you sharing it. And I'm like hyped. Like, I feel like you talking about that, you can
Mhm.
feel that motivation behind what you're saying. Like, you can
Yeah,
tell that that is actually genuinely what keeps you going.
right.
And I feel like that like grit, like almost like the furrow of the eyebrows, like, yeah, like that's why you're here. You're
Yeah,
here to protect the vulnerable. And I do think it's important to have that why that motivates you.
right.
And everyone who's listening, like if you don't have a why or you haven't thought about it, like take a moment and like really sit down and write it down and figure out like what is that thing that's important to you and that's
Mhm.
going to keep you going, because it does have to be deeper than yourself, in
Yeah,
my opinion. Like it has to be.
right.
Otherwise it's like, why are you here?
Right.
So I
You
appreciate
know,
that.
people at we the yes cops, or people wanting to be police officers. Why do you want to police? And the number one answer is, I want to help people. You
Hmm.
know, and that's cool. I challenge people when I was interviewing people. I would say, well, you could have gone to the clergy. God forbid, you could have been a firefighter. But there's many ways that you could help people. It's just a joke, fire friends.
I know,
Uh,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
but what I want to hear people say is, I want to protect people. I'm here to help. I've been called to protect, and that's what I tell people. I know I've said it earlier, but if you are coming, and I think part of our the psychological safety that we have when we get together and we understand what our why is, and police departments is, we, like you said, we know what we're doing. We know what our purpose is. When you
Yeah.
don't know what our purpose is, we're just driving around in cars, going from call to call. All I'm thinking about is getting off. I'm thinking about how hot it is, how much this vest weighs, and I'm thinking about all these other things. And it's okay to have those thoughts, so long as you know, it'll always come back to, but I'm here, I'm wearing this vest, I'm out here in this heat because I was called to do it, because I want to protect people who need protection and protect the vulnerable from harm.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to highlight a little bit about what you guys are doing. So, we now have that understanding of why you're doing
Mhm.
it. And I think that that has to be first, and then the what. So organizationally, like I said, I've heard some good things, but what are some of the wellness resources that you've implemented internally that you have found to be really successful?
First, let me give full credit to where credit is due.
Okay.
These resources, which is the large reason, one of the larger reasons I wanted to come work here, were in place prior to me arriving.
Okay.
They were set in place by many people. I want to give credit to former Chief Jeff Spivey, um, Assistant Chief at the time, and now the Chief of the Dallas Fort Worth Airport, Brian Redburn, and some others here who really are responsible for where we are today. Basically, at the Irving Police Department, with first, unfortunately, there were several incidents where our members died by suicide.
Mhm.
And as you know all too well, and unfortunately, you know that how traumatic and shocking that is to an organization.
Yeah.
And I think that the feeling was we have to do better. And so I know Irving was one of the first people who started a real strong peer support team made up of cops who, had lived experience in a lot of the areas. It was comprehensive in that there were cops who had dealt with divorce and addiction and any number of things. And I think the early recognition was by the administration here that these cops are not going to come talk to brass. There's not a cop that's going to want to come up here, and no matter how much trust we have or want to talk to someone brass, because the concern would be if they don't think I'm fit for duty, they're going to take my gun or badge away. And that's not
Right.
what was required. And so the peer support team started and was strong in that cops were going to cops, talking about issues. We brought on early a clinician. We also have a family advocacy center that has clinicians there. And so I think the natural next step in this evolution was when the peer support team um, hit a roadblock, or their services, didn't go far enough. They were smart enough to say, "How about we get you some help from a clinician?" And then what was born was, as you know, back then there was a lot of clinicians. There were a lot of help out there that weren't culturally competent in what we were. They would send. I'm sure you heard the story before. They would send you to these one shape fits all places, and cops just totally rejected that because no one knew what we were talking about or what we were going through. So the idea was, what if we developed a a place where police officers and firefighters could go, that was staffed with people who could help us, who were culturally competent in what we were doing and understanding us and support us in that way. And so Irving was the first city, and I don't know too many who've done it since, who started what we call the Public Safety Wellness Unit. And the Public Safety Wellness Unit has psychologists who are staffed there. It does not answer to the police department. It does not answer to the fire department. In fact, in the city organization chart, it falls under the city manager's office.
Mhm.
There we have a Dr. Betancourt, who sits, and the way people get through Dr. Betancourt is through the peer support team. So quite literally, I have no idea a police officer in Irving who is handling something that most people would ever even imagine seeing or having to deal with could go to a peer and talk to a peer and to try to um, get some assistance and help. And if that doesn't go far enough, they could quite literally enter into the Public Safety Wellness Unit and quite literally get help, inpatient and outpatient treatment if for whatever the issue is that they're struggling with, and I don't know about it.
That's amazing.
I may, if it gets to the point where it's an outpatient treatment where we're having to, we've also through our human resources have these service providers who are helping us in very specific things, maybe alcohol addiction, where an outpatient program may be necessary and warranted because someone is in crisis. So this entire construct is built to where I know nothing about it.
Mhm.
Now, in the past, now it's caused some issues, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But what the heart of the matter is, what the message is, I want you to get help. I don't care what's going on. I don't want us. I don't want to have to do a full-fledged, what we call a civil service fitness for duty evaluation because um, that's not what the cop or the firefighter needs. The cop and the firefighter needs help. And just like my why is to protect the vulnerable from harm on the street, my why and responsibility is to protect my guys from what they're going through. So
Yeah,
this whole construct is amazing, and we're so thankful to have it, and it's working.
that is amazing. And I love that you recognized that they needed support from people who will use that word like culturally competent or,
Mhm.
understand the profession in a way. And it's really interesting because I've had this conversation a few different times recently. I find that like wellness topics kind of have this like wave to them with me where I feel like we kind of start talking about all the same stuff and it doesn't matter what state you're in. It's like everyone's kind of dealing with similar things all at the same time. And one of the conversations I've had recently is that a lot of agencies are having to do what you just said, find someone who has experience working with first responders because whatever EAP program or, that the, talk therapy program that they had before, their therapists were actually quite literally saying, yeah, you're just too messed up. You should just leave. And they were having officers dropping like flies. Like people were
Yeah,
just leaving and still weren't getting the support and the help that they needed when they first came in. They're like, yeah, like we can't help you. Like you're probably just too far gone. You should just go. And
right.
so they were like, okay, well, first of all, like we need to get people who can actually help our guys and girls through whatever it is that they're dealing with. And then I love that you're saying it's completely confidential. So you're creating that space of safety and confidence within your organization, knowing that if someone does need that support, they have it and, they're not going to be deemed unfit for duty. And I want to talk
Right.
about that because you said
Yeah.
like this expression of, are they fit for duty? And, in Texas, the civil service system that you have in
Mhm.
place. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, there's about 1,800, probably more police departments and or law enforcement organizations in Texas. Probably 100 or so of us subscribe to Chapter 143 of the Texas Local Government Code, Civil Service, and it's meant to be a law for police officers and firefighters in these types of organizations that really codified and tried to apply fairness in hiring standards, promotion standards, termination standards, and things like that. And one of the aspects of this law is this idea of fitness for duty. And before wellness programs even or peer support programs even came to light before this kind of goes back to your Texas question. The only means by which to handle someone who was in crisis was to put them through this fit for duty process. It's a very clinical process. In fact, let's say an officer presented with some type of behavior that has now led to some type of misconduct, and we knew that let's say addiction. And all I would be able to do is try to say, dude, I know you can't be a cop because you're struggling with this issue. So you need to go to your counselor, and then she needs to sign, or he or she needs to sign off on to make sure that you're good that you're fit. And then they could bring me that letter and say I'm fit. But if I didn't believe that they were fit, then I could put them through this process where I send them to 3 psychologists or psychiatrists, and if they agreed that the person wasn't fit, then the cop was gone.
Yeah.
That's really the only technical thing that we have to handle these types of situations until you have leaders who are minded to say, listen, there's more we can do. What if within this system we create these peer support teams we create these public safety wellness units. We get these officers the help that they need, and so we can get them back to where they're fit for duty. So that's the space that I want to live in. I don't want to live in this official. So that's where we're trying to do. Now, if we can't get any consensus in how to do that in the center, then the only thing I have left is this process for 143 cities. And so that's the only. And we've had a little bit of issue there with trying to get. I need something that tells me that someone is able to return back to work. But those are administrative hurdles that a motivated leadership can figure out how to circumnavigate, and figure out. So it's not. I guess what I'm saying is, from administrative standpoint, leaders have to be willing to go down this road. They have to recognize that we got to take one. You have to recognize that these guys are going through all kinds of things, and they are because you went through them. If you're sitting in the chairs that I'm sitting in, and we got to have a way to try to get them back or help as best we can. The unfortunate thing, though, is there's sometimes with all these things, and I'm probably getting ahead of myself. I'm sorry. That I struggle with is when things happen or manifest themselves that are so egregious that you can't help somebody.
Yeah.
And the fear there is if the troops think that you didn't do right by this person, it could adversely affect them having trust in the system at large. And so it's a very delicate balance. I don't know if I'm even making any sense, but it's not easy.
It makes complete sense. And the one thing that kept popping out to me when you were speaking was this core of like, we want to help. We want to help them get the resources that they need. And if there isn't that trust and people are fearful of reaching out for resources, then you can't get them the help that they need. And like you said, it's like then if you're stuck in the system where you feel like that's the only option you have, then that also creates that fear. And so how can you create a system and a program and a culture within the organization where people know that it is safe to seek out those resources and to get the help that they need.
So, as you know, cops believe only none of the things they hear, only half the things they see. That's just how we are.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer to that question is your words and your deeds have to be consistent. Cops are going to have to see that those who've gone before them, who've entered this process, have in fact come out the other side. In fact, have not seen any scrutiny from the higher ups. They're going to have to trust. Well, they don't have to trust. They have to be able to see that the things that are coming out of my mouth as a chief are actually that's actually how it is. And if there's 1 degree, centimeter of space between my words and what we say we're doing, then trust is out the window. That's why, just like in anything, especially with cops, your words and your deeds have to be consistent. That means you have to believe in what you're saying. You have to believe in what you're putting your support behind. Because if you don't believe in wellness, if you don't believe in this stuff as a leader, then none of this stuff there won't be trust. And listen, it's hard. It's hard here. I've got there are people in the middle between me and them, me and my cops who may not believe in this. And so you have to create a way where, just because you're working for a sergeant or lieutenant or some commander or someone who maybe thinks that this is still holding on to what I was had to deal with in 1982, just deal with it. You have to create a way where they can go and seek and get some help. And it may not be I'm also saying if you don't want to go through our wellness unit, you don't have to go through our wellness unit. There's a great organization here in the Dallas-Fort Worth, and I'll probably get in trouble, but it's called FIRST. There's there's a lot of things, a lot of places. We just all I care about is that you're getting taken care of.
Yeah, and I think that that it all circles back to the why. Like if you want to be able to protect the vulnerable, then you have to be well. Like your performance is impacted by your wellness. And so if that's important to you, then how can you as an individual make sure that you're reaching out, but then also as an organization, how can you make sure that you're supporting the individual so that they have the resources where they can reach out? And so it is kind of like a first full circle thing of like your wellness impacts your performance. Your performance is why you're here. And so how can we make sure that we can keep you there in the best mental and physical shape as possible?
Right, right, absolutely.
Yeah, I know, and I know we're kind of reaching the end of our conversation, so we don't have to dive too much into it, but I also think it's kind of that question of like buy-in. It's and how do you get that, especially with a larger organization, how do you get that? And I do think it's what we talked about before. I think you have the early adopters, you have individuals in leadership who are taking those steps, who are promoting these things, who are passionate about these things, who are doing these things. And then that, is like kind of that snowball effect that happens eventually, but it takes time, especially with a larger organization.
It just takes time. And I want to reiterate, if they don't, if someone still has that obstacle of trust, there is another good thing that Texas did. And I think a couple of years ago, 4 years, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, they're going to kill me. Texas, has its own peer support network
Yeah.
where, through with the assistance of the Meadows Mental Health Institute, have created these hubs across the state where, Texas is a huge state with a lot of smaller agencies. And the idea there is somebody out in Ranger, Texas or Cisco, Texas, who are working for those police departments are working in a more smaller rural and versus urban who sits next to Dallas in an urban setting. They're doing the same job. They're seeing and suffering from the same things. How does that cop in Cisco, how does that cop get help? And they don't have a peer support team or a public safety wellness unit. Well, now in Texas, they can take advantage of. We've got the peer support, the statewide peer support team, our blue chip program. There are a lot of things that we're saying now as leaders through the Texas Police Chiefs Association that we're saying we care for you. When I started as a chief, I was told, we don't care about morale. How do you measure morale? Well, morale's huge. And if you're a chief, you're not paying attention to morale, you shouldn't be sitting in this chair. And part of that morale is cops want to know that they're safe. They're safe to do their job. They're putting themselves out there. We're giving them a gun and a badge, and we're saying, go out and protect us. We need to protect them.
Yeah, and I love that you said that because I actually didn't know that you had a
Mhm.
network statewide for peer support. And I've had a lot of conversations recently about counties that are doing this now, but I haven't heard of like an entire system throughout the state. And I think that that is really cool
Yeah.
because you're right, especially if it's a smaller organization. I hear this all the time where it's like, well, we all know each other. Like, I don't want to reach out to Joe necessarily,
Yeah.
but maybe I could reach out to someone else, who doesn't really know me that can give me that support that I need. And I think when you can remember too that like you're all a family, doesn't matter if you're in, Texas
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
California or whatever, like I think remembering that there is a network outside of your agency and there are resources and people that you can reach out to, I think that that's really great. I've actually never heard that before.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can give you the folks, but I mean the Texas legislature gave money to Meadows and the Caruth Foundation to create this 2 legislative sessions ago. Our legislature meets every 2 years, so 2 legislative sessions ago, and it's statewide, and so it's an attempt. Unfortunately, I don't know if you know, but a week or so ago, or no, I think 4 Harris County sheriff's deputies died by suicide.
I did hear about that.
Now Harris County is the largest county in the state. It's huge, and it's not a small sheriff's department by any, but still we're all doing the same job, and we're all suffering from the same, being exposed to the same stuff. So we all need to get better at removing the stigma that it's okay to say I'm not good. It's okay to say I need more time. It's okay. Um, it's okay. It's okay. Remove the stigma. We've
Yeah.
got the legislature also gave us, now we have 3 days. Cops get off if they just can go to their sergeant and say, man, I saw an accident today that hit me, shook me to my core, and I need some time. Boom, you go. And those are the type of attitude. That's the kind of culture that's going to eventually change, and the stigma will fall away. One day, I'm confident.
I'm confident too. And I think that, obviously, especially when you hear tragedies, like you just mentioned, um, I think sometimes you don't maybe feel like there's that progress. But I mean, since I started in this wellness space 8 years ago, I've seen a ton of forward movement when it comes to wellness. And even just having these conversations, I think is something that is huge and so important. Like the more we can talk about it, the more we can share resources and come together, as individuals who are trying to provide you guys with resources, or you guys as a community of law enforcement and first responders, you will start to continue to see that momentum move in that direction. And I am confident, and I plan to be here for as long as you, 33 years. So I am really hopeful of that too. And I think that that's the only way we can go is forward at this
Yeah,
point. So
yeah,
I have one final question for you.
sure.
This is the reason why I started this podcast, is to give words of wisdom from individuals like yourself who have that perspective, who have been in it for a really long time in the context of wellness. What words of wisdom would you share with someone who is maybe earlier in their career, or someone who's struggling, who needs resources? What is something that like you wish you would have known, or a piece of advice you wish you would have listened to, that would have helped, with wellness and the trajectory of your career?
I wish someone would have told me you're going to see you're going to see things that you can't even imagine. And and I wish someone would have said, and it's going to affect you. It's going to rock you to your core. Um, and this may sound cheesy, but I wish someone would have told me you're not alone, and you were called to do this job. You're exactly where you're supposed to be, and that you're not by yourself. And I think that message, I think a lot of times you think you're, I think that's it. I think sometimes despite the fact that you've got a community and all that stuff that you're dealing with, you think you're alone. On August 20th of 2003, I was a sergeant leading a SWAT team on a dynamic entry warrant. And as a result of that warrant, I had a police officer who was shot in the face and in the chest and in the wrist. He lived, but I'm going to tell you, I struggled for a long time because as a sergeant, I felt like I put him in that position to be shot and nearly killed. And I struggled with that by myself for a very, very long time. In fact, back then, I was upset behind the PD the morning of, and I had an assistant chief come up to me, and I was wanting words, I guess, of encouragement or wanting something, and I don't blame him for this. This was a post-Vietnam guy at the time. He just looked at me and said, "Why are you upset? You had to know this was going to happen," which is like totally the
Mm.
wrong message,
Yeah.
But I think the sense of loneliness in that, and the sense of what did I do to get my guy shot? It was a family guy. I love this guy to death. Still here, still serving over in Carrollton. But my point is, what I struggled with in those months and years after was this idea that I did that to him. I put him in that position, and I just wish I would have had folks to sit down and say, "No, man, it's you know, you're not this. You're okay. I'm here for you," or just the sense that you're not alone. I
Yeah.
guess
I love
that's
that. I don't think that sounds cheesy at all. I think that
Mm,
that is a great piece of advice of you're not alone. Because I do think a lot of people isolate and suffer alone and um, don't seek the resources because of that. And so I really appreciate those words of wisdom. I think they're
yeah.
great. I appreciate your time so much. And, we didn't know if we were going to talk for a full hour, and here we are. It goes by so fast.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your time. If there's anything else you want to share, anything we missed, let me know. Otherwise,
Okay. No, thank you for what you're doing. Keep part just to motivate you a bit. Your message needs to be continuous. Keep doing it for 33 years because we need to hear this. We need to hear people who care about this, about us doing this job. And thank you for what you're doing.
thank you. I appreciate that. We'll stay in touch. Thank you for
Yeah,
your
yeah.
time.
Cool.